Today's interview is with Leland Sklar. I did this interview here in Nashville after Leland had finished doing a session with Livingston Taylor. I hadn't seen it in 15 years. I just, like so many of these tapes, they got put up. We expected to use them when we got a certain exhibit put up in the museum. Unfortunately, at this time, we hadn't put an exhibit up with Leland in it yet. And so going back and reviewing this tape, and his enthusiasm and love and his respect for his fellow musicians he's not a prima donna. He looks at other people and thinks about, what am I doing here? And really, the people that he's with are thinking, what are they doing there with him? This is just one of the most perfect examples of a studio musician interview I've ever done. I hope you enjoy it. Leland Sklar.
What's your earliest memories of wanting to play a musical instrument?
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, I started studying piano, and studied piano till I was about 12. I entered junior high school, and I go in there, and I had a lot of success as a child pianist. I was like a child prodigy, and so I entered junior high school and went, here I am, your pianist is here. And they went, the music teacher's name was Theodore Lynn, and Mr. Lynn, because he's still my junior high school teacher, so I have to call him Mr. Lynn. He said, there's like 50 kids who want to play piano, but we don't have any string bass players. So if I teach you, do you want to try that? And I said, why not? Because I wanted to play. So they pulled out a string bass, because I really wasn't sure what he was talking about. And I went, wow, this is interesting. Yeah, upright. And he started giving me lessons, and I fell in love with it. And eventually the piano kind of fell by the wayside for me, because I really devoted myself to bass at that point, because I just loved the instrument. I loved the sonic. I loved the position it held. And so I started playing all kinds of stuff. It was, orchestral work and jazz, and just kind of learning, and eventually ended up getting an electric bass when I was about 15, I think, was when I finally got an electric bass.
What kind was that?
It was a Melody bass from Japan, and I had a St. George amplifier. And it's pretty cool. I'd love to see it at this point. I don't know whatever became of it, and eventually worked my way up through the ranks. When the first time I heard the Beatles, it changed my life, because I was a classical snob as a kid. I wasn't into Beach Boys, wasn't into Elvis or any of that. I was totally like Gershwin and Copeland and just all the classics. But when I heard the Beatles and the English Revolution took place, I was kind of freaked out and loved it. Then I wanted to emulate McCartney, so the only thing I could find, though, was an echo bass, which was this kind of a rip-off of a Hofner. So I ended up with that, and my first really good amp was a Standell Super Imperial, and which I wish I still had right now. But just somehow that ended up just turning into my life. And
so my question was going to be, and you beat me to it, was what bass players, if any, were influential in your life? And I guess it was McCartney then, right?
Well, McCartney was a major influence. Jack Bruce was a major influence. One of my favorite bass players, two of my favorite bass players actually, was Bob Mosley from Moby Grape and Roy Estrada from the original Mothers of Invention. I just love the way those guys played. Mosley he was very much like Jack Bruce, monstrous player, monstrous singer. And like McCartney, I mean, these guys just, they sort of had it all. But to me, I'm influenced by everybody who picks up the instrument, from the most kind of Neanderthal player to a Jocko, because there's essences of it. I don't feel competitive with anybody. I'm more of a fan of the instrument. So whenever I see anybody playing, being it Paul Jackson with the Headhunters, or when I see, Will Lee play, or Geddy Lee. I mean, you sort of Les Claypool. It doesn't matter. I sort of watch all of them, and I kind of enjoy them just for the essence of what they do, and I don't feel any kind of so-called pissing contest with anybody. It's all, I love being a member of this community, and just sort of sit there and watch the Larry Grahams and the Alfonso Johnsons and all these different, the Bootsy Collins. I mean, the extremes that this can all go to are really fascinating, and I just love it. And I have so many friends that are bass players in LA that are just, every time I see them, I just kind of go, oh, that's great.
When did you finally get into a P bass or a jazz bass?
Probably around, I think I got my jazz bass, my first real good legit bass, probably around 66, in 1966, somewhere around there. And of course I was horribly stupid because it was this absolutely mint perfect candy apple red 62 jazz bass, which I took all the hardware off and I carved the body into like a Les Paul shape and had peace, love stuff carved all over it, and sat one night and when I was in college and just carved this thing all up, and then had to put a 2-pound block of lead in the end of my strap because I had cut so much off. It was headstock heavy. I still have the bass at home though, but that was my first kind of real upscale bass. And when I started towards the end of 69, 70 with James Taylor, that was the bass I used on all of our early stuff, and it's a wonderful instrument. And I went through this period where, still to me, the definitive bass rig for pop, rock and roll, any of this kind of music, for me is still a 62 jazz bass and an old Ampeg SVT with 1610s. It's like whenever I go to the trade shows and you see all these companies, I go, it's already been built. It's done. It's not like you're looking for something that has never existed. It's already been done. And I just wish, I had some of that stuff at this point, because it still kills. It's really good. But
do you think that that the way that this, obviously we're in a tremendous studio here, how everybody's gone back and gravitated toward wanting the old amps, the tube amps and everything.
Yeah.
Do you think that that same thing's going to be with all the guitars? I really don't. I'm with you. I think they've already done it.
Yeah.
Unless the human hand mutates, a Fender neck.
It's hard to improve on that. It's really hard to improve on it. An observation of mine, it's like when we talk about like our parents' generation and how kind of appalled they were when rock and roll came along. The thing that's still to me really interesting is, since I started in this, there's been like 2 generations of people have come along, yet the format of this music hasn't changed. When you look at most bands, you're looking at a guitar, 2 guitar players, a drummer, a bass player, maybe a keyboard player, singer. And it doesn't matter if you hearken back to Bill Haley and the Comets, or you're looking at Green Day or whatever. It's all kind of similar, and so the instruments haven't really changed from those very early instruments. And it's interesting watching guys trying to go back. I mean, you can see there's something there when guys are willing to spend $25,000 for a Les Paul or an early Strat or something.
The early Strats, the early Fenders, all the pickups were hand wound.
Yeah.
And there would be some ladies, some of the Mexican ladies that did all that work, that would wrap them loosely and some would wrap them really tightly.
Yeah.
Yet that really wasn't what they thought for a long time, that was what made the difference. And of course, every neck was different because the guy making it would sand it to fit his hand.
Yeah.
But what they found is, over a period of time, the magnets have lost a certain amount of pull or whatever, and that's what made the pickups sound hotter. And so that's how they've developed the 62 and the Texas Special pickups, as a result of the magnet there.
Wow.
So, and of course, there's nothing like a hand-worn neck.
Yeah, I mean, you get the H, and plus you get, wood has a beautiful quality as it ages, and as just all those cells in it kind of bond and breathe and everything, as compared to like new wood that still is trying to find itself, and settling into its position. So there's something really nice about vintage gear, but I'm not a gearhead. I mean, if somebody said to me right now, you're going to die if you can't tell us how many frets are on your bass, I'd be laying here in a puddle of blood, because I really don't know, because I really don't care. I mean, it's just never meant anything to me. I'll play anything that I get handed. Sometimes you're fortunate enough to get handed something pretty good, and sometimes you end up with some junk. But I'm absolutely not a gearhead. I don't know anything technical about it. I don't set my basses up or anything. I mean, I change my strings and batteries, and that's about it. And I can tweak the bridge in a bit in an emergency. But I have friends that are really completely absorbed in the instrument. So I just go over, and it's a nice chance to hang out together, and I let them tweak it and intonate it and all that. And it always sounds great when they're done, or they do the refrets and all that stuff. So I just like playing.
When did you start to play in front of a crowd, and when did you have your first band, if you did?
I was probably in my first band, probably in the early 60s.
And what did you play? I mean, what kind of music?
It would have probably been leaning towards surf bands, or maybe a little bit of kind of Beatlesy kind of cover stuff. Around mid-60s is where I really started to play around with a lot of groups. I would tend sometimes to be in 4 or 5 bands at one time, all local out in LA. And
when did you move to LA?
No, when I was 4 or 5 years old, I think I was, when we moved there. So I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, and there was lots of players around, and it was a real exciting time for everybody, because there was lots of places to play. There were clubs, we'd play fraternity parties, we'd play community centers, teen centers. You always know you're doing well when the police come and tell you the neighbors are complaining and you have to turn down in the garage and all that stuff. But I managed to end up meeting some guys that really were hungry and had a good time. So we used to always put these things together, and we would have bands that did like James Brown songs, or the Turtles, any of that kind of stuff we were playing. And then we started playing clubs in Hollywood, because Hollywood at that point had a really vital club scene. So we would be playing at the Hullabaloo or Pandora's Box, or going down to the Golden Bear or the Sea Witch, and there's all these great places. And you'd see Jimi Hendrix, you'd see Jim Morrison, and all these people all the time. I mean, it was vital, exciting time there. And kind of in '68, when all hell broke loose on the Sunset Strip, and all of it's true, and the police came through and shut the place down, it suddenly all changed, and it got a little bit more difficult to do that kind of stuff.
Were you able to hang out with Hendrix or the Doors or the Jefferson Airplane? Or?
No, I mean, I sort of was on the perimeter of that, because I remember being up at Devonshire Downs in the North San Fernando Valley, and Jimi Hendrix was playing up there. And I was kind of standing near the back of the stage, and I looked next to me, and it was the first time I had met David Crosby, because we were both standing there. And I kind of talked to him a bit, but there used to be a club called The Experience down on Sunset, and Hendrix would come in there and play. Chicago, when they were CTA, Chicago Transit Authority, would play there. And
I love Terry Kath.
Oh man, just give me a break. It was so good. And
Satira.
Yeah, so I mean, we'd always be around seeing those people. I was in this band called Little John Farm, and we'd go up the coast, and we'd play San Francisco. We'd do gigs with groups like Cold Blood, and so it was really fantastic. There were so many great bands around, and you'd sort of meet these people. Like I remember doing a Doors record after Morrison died, and it was just funny to kind of sit there with Ray and Robbie, and and you're kind of looking at these guys going, "Wow, this is the Cats." And I've always, to this day, I've been a fan in this business. I kind of pinch myself every day that I've got a career, because I just kind of sit there, and every time I see any of these guys playing and stuff, I just go, wow, I can be as stupid as the next person out there. First time I met McCartney, I'm just kind of turned to Ralph Cramden. It's just like you don't know what to say, because these people have had such a powerful influence on your life, and it's like I just finished a new record with Joe Cocker, and it's hard to sit in a studio and look at Joe Cocker and not just kind of go, wow, it's Joe Cocker. Or I did Willie Nelson. We just finished Merle Haggard, and I love Merle. This is like the third album I've done with him, and he's just, as soon as he opens his mouth. And Willie's the same way. When we did the Great Divide album, it's guys like that, they get in the vocal booth and one note, and you go, it's him.
Yeah, Willie, those singers like that, like Haggard and Willie, I miss them.
Yeah.
It's just, not putting anybody else down, but I just miss the people that you could hear one note and know who you're listening to.
And it's hard to hang a signature on somebody, and those guys were totally there. I feel so blessed in my career, the amount of people I've gotten to work with, and I think back to working with Waylon and any of these guys, and I never got to work with Johnny Cash, but of that bunch, I just go, man, you kind of walk in the room and pinch yourself. It's like I did an album years ago with a group, oh God, what were they called? I can't remember now, but George Martin was producing them. And I'm sitting at the console next to George Martin, and I'm just kind of going, what the hell am I doing here? That's George Martin sitting there. And the most beautiful man, and gifted, amazing talent. But you just always find it, hard to believe you're sharing that space with these guys, and that they know who you are, and they're asking you for ideas and stuff. It's pretty.
And what a huge compliment that is for you. To achieve that goal.
I really, like I said earlier, I sort of pinch myself every day with this, because it's in a way, it's nothing I ever strived for. I was always a band guy. I never thought about being a studio musician or anything. I never knew what I was going to do. I just loved playing in bands and hanging out with guys and the musical community. So kind of through the back door, studio work, it was all because of my relationship with James Taylor. Because I was in these bands up to that point, just gigging around. And when I met James and his career was just starting, he asked me to play with him. And overnight, he became the biggest thing on earth at his genre of music. And Russ Kunkel and I and Danny Korchmar, this core of guys who were starting to play with him, got swept along in this kind of tidal wave that happened. And suddenly, every singer-songwriter that was coming out, people were saying, we got to get those guys who work with James. So Russ and I would end up working with Jackson Browne and Warren Zevon and all these different people. And you just spend the whole time sitting there going, how the hell did I end up here? This is really amazing. Because I would always look at these guys and go, man, these are all so talented. And it's just really a kind of an interesting situation to find. I felt that way. We did an induction in the Rock Walk Hall of Fame at the Guitar Center in Hollywood. And it was a bass player induction. And I go walking in there, and there's Tim Bogert and Billy Sheehan and Bootsy, and they were posthumously bringing in Jamerson and Jocko and all this, and you just kind of sit there and go, what the hell am I doing here? I should be standing on the other side of the fence just going, yes, you guys are great. So it's always interesting to me to be a part of that community, because I don't have my own perspective on me, and I don't really see what I've done. But I know I've worked on a couple of thousand records and stuff. I know my history, but I still feel I don't feel quite like Bob Dole talking about Bob Dole, but I do feel slightly removed from my career, so I still am sort of in awe of everybody around me, and when I walk in a room, and like we did today, and to see, Gad here and Paul Franklin and all just the amount of talent that was in this room today, you just you feel just so lucky to be able to hang with these guys and be a part of them.
I find that to be the case with most of the people I've spoken with for this project. They all have that admiration and respect for their fellow, for their peers,
Yeah.
And that's really a gift in itself, to still be able to be, to not be jaded and to be excited about meeting people like that.
Well, that's kind of the fun, like when I work with Phil Collins. Phil's really funny. He's like the consummate fan. I can see him get like dry mouth when we were backstage at a gig and some movie stars there, and he's like, wow, gosh, I wonder if they'll take their picture with me, and they're standing there doing the same thing to him. It's real refreshing, but generally I've noticed amongst the studio players and the sidemen, it's a different person than the stars. You don't have the sycophants around you blowing smoke up you all the time and starting to get too absorbed in your own press and in self-importance. You know, I mean, I'll go on the road with these guys and they'll say, you know, what did you guys do today? And we'll say, oh, we went, you know, to the mall, saw a movie, went out and had dinner. And they didn't do anything because they can't go anywhere. But when people come up to us, because I get recognized all the time just because of this beard commitment and all the stuff that I've got, I mean, hardly a day goes by where somebody doesn't come up to me. But they don't come up in the same way they would come up to Phil or James Taylor or somebody like that. They just come up to me and they go, aren't you? Oh, God, I love, you know, your music and all that. And we have a nice little talk. It's not like they're shaking, you know, and freaking out when they see you. It's not like this big star. So we've all kind of enjoyed this other side of things where we have this admiration of a community, but they're not looking at you like you're unapproachable. And most of the guys that I know in the studio are all pretty straight up guys. There's no bullshit going on.
What was your first session you remember playing?
My first real professional date after starting with James that somebody actually called me and hunted me down and hired me for was Brian Hyland, who did Itsy Bitsy Teensy Weensy Yellow. He was being produced by Del Shannon, and Del called me and asked me to come down.
Did he do Still with a Kiss?
He had a number of hits, and it was really fun, and it was kind of, I was going, wow, this is really a trip. Because I was in a band back in 1966 called Group Therapy, and we were produced by Mike Post, who at that point was doing, I think, the Andy, what the hell's his last name? Yeah, brain is dead here at the end of the day. Oh, the Andy Williams Show. He was the MD, musical director for that show. And somehow he got involved with us, and when we went in the studio, we thought we were going to be playing our music, but it was all studio guys. We were only going to sing. And I walked into this room, and there's Bob West and Earl Palmer and Carol Kay and Jim Gordon and all these guys. And I just sat there like glued to the window going, this is unbelievable. And sort of absorbed the process a bit because I'd never really been a recording musician. So it was kind of a learn on the gig once I started doing studio work. I had to really understand the kind of the mechanics and the ethics of working in a studio kind of quickly. And it's been really fascinating, and I feel really fortunate that I've gotten to work in all kinds of genres, to go from like the James Taylors and Jackson Browns to Billy Cobham doing Spectrum with him, and then working with like Gladys Knight or Barbra Streisand or Anthony Newley and all these different kinds of artists, Hall and Oates, and I love it. I can't emphasize how blessed I feel every day that this is my gig. And also touring. I still love touring desperately. I'm going to be on the road about 8 months this year. So
Olivia Newton-John, James Ingram, Linda Ronstadt, Carole King, Peter Cetera, one of my favorites, Andy Griffith.
Yeah, I love Andy.
Like you said, Joe Cocker, Don Henley, and then you jump over and you're doing Wynonna Judd and Clint Black and Lisa Loeb.
Lisa was just at the house the other day. She is the nicest person.
I met her at a guitar show in Texas, and we talk about no attitude. I mean, just the sweetest, nicest person.
She's just adorable. Just as cute as she can be.
Yeah. Johnny Mathis, Leanne Womack, Vince Gill, Neil Sedaka, Brian Wilson.
Yeah, Van Dyke, I dearly love. He's one of my dearest friends. And Van Dyke is absolutely one of the neatest people to spend time with. He's just, when Van Dyke talks, it sounds like a Ken Burns special. And his command of the language is so stunning that I feel like Nipper, the RCA dog. I just kind of sit there and go, just talk, and I just want to dig him. And he's just a delightful man. And I love him dearly. But yeah, I feel real lucky when I look at like the Stones or something like that. As great as they are and as the greatest success they've had, I kind of look, for the most part, they've only traveled in their own core and stuff. And the thing I feel so lucky about is that I've gotten to like work with so many people. I've gotten to work with the greatest musicians in the world, and I've gotten to work with so many artists who I'm absolutely, enamored by. And it's such a joy to go in the studio and share time with these people.
I was at Earl Scruggs' 80th birthday party the other
Great.
night. And what struck me about it was that you had Ricky Skaggs and his son Randy and,
Yeah.
and Emmylou and 18 players sitting around. Absolutely no egos. They were just sitting there, and it was pure, unadulterated love of music and each other. And you see that, and you realize why they are where they are.
Yeah.
And because that's what they are.
Yeah, that's the first. All the success or whatever's come to them is the byproduct of the joy that they have with what they do, and that's what's cool. Because I worked on the Earl and Friends album, and it was the same thing there. You kind of look over and you go, "Man, that's Earl Scruggs." 'Cause I'd known Randy, but I'd never really worked with Earl, and suddenly he's sitting there playing, and you're just going, "Wow, that's Earl." And just the history that these guys have. When I worked with Andy Griffith, I still call Andy regularly. We talk on the phone, but I sat there in the studio pinching myself, just going, "It's Andy's right there." And the greatest joy to me, practically this whole business, was one day coming home, and there was a light on my answering machine. I pick it up, and it's, "Hey Lee, it's Andy Griffith here calling you from North Carolina. Just want to check in, see how you're doing." And I just went, "Yes, God, Andy's a friend." After spending a whole life growing up with these guys, it's fantastic to me.
When did you start working with Crosby, Stills, and Nash?
I got involved with those guys. Probably it must have been in the mid '70s when we did. I didn't do a lot with Crosby, Stills, and Nash. I did a lot with David and Graham when they would do their duo. So we did Wind on the Water album, and done a bunch of their albums. In fact, we just did an album in January of last year with them. We were going to do a DVD of it, but it's been postponed. So I've known them pretty much for about 30 years now, and it's another one of those things. You walk in after having loved the Hollies and all this, and suddenly Graham's like your friend. David's a friend after loving the Byrds and all this stuff, and then sitting there just wearing out the first Crosby, Stills, Nash record. And I've known Stephen, and I'm getting ready to leave for France at the end of this month to tour with this artist Veronique Sanson. And Veronique was married to Stephen back in the 70s, and they have a son, Christopher, who's a monstrous talent too. Great. He sounds like Stephen did in Buffalo Springfield days, and he plays great flat pick guitar and plays great piano. So it's kind of funny, these circles just kind of keep, it's almost like watching somebody make taffy, and it just keeps sitting there pulling over and melding back into itself again, and you keep crossing paths with people.
How incredible about David and his son.
James Raymond is so talented and the nicest cat in the world, because when I did the CPR album and stuff, and almost any project I do with them, James is involved in it. And it's one of those situations where you go, this could have been the worst thing in the world. Like suddenly in later life, an adult kid shows up that you didn't know you had and goes, "You owe me, man," and kind of makes your life hell. This guy suddenly shows up, wants to introduce David to his grandchild, and also comes with so much talent and love of music and what they do that suddenly they just connect and they make music together. I mean, it was one of those things you sit and watch and you go, you couldn't write a script.
Ray Charles?
Ray Charles was really lovely. One of the few times this is the first time Gad and I ever played together, but they did a cover of, I think it was Elton wrote it, of Song for You. They had cut the track and then they wanted to replace the bass and drums, and when I came in they had just replaced the drums, and I think Gad did the drums on it, so then I did that, but that was for Ray Charles. It's sad that he's gone, but man, that guy left such a fabulous legacy behind that. He'll be here forever, and it's just I'm sad he wasn't able to ultimately see the success of this last duets album, being as great as it was. But as it was going down, I'm sure he knew how good it was. But nice man. I mean, he had his thing, and a lot of people, thought, this is a tough guy, but you know, when you're doing what he does, you know, you just have to sit back and go, good for you, you know, let's go for it. For me to have eventually gone the circle where they're my contemporaries and friends, and I do sessions with them, and you walk in the studio and you see them, and it's like, it's just, you go, wow, it's pretty cool, because they're still at it too. It's just enjoy it. It's a great ride. If you are fortunate enough to be successful at it, that's frosting on the cake, but it's a pretty nice cake without frosting too.